Welcome back, everyone, to this Forge College Explainer. I am absolutely pumped you're here. If you've been following along in the Ethereum fundamentals track, you just wrapped up building and testing your own CLI scripts. Awesome work on that, seriously. But now that we're pulling all this real, raw data straight from the node, we have to tackle the million-dollar question. How do we actually measure the network's ultimate truth? Well, that's exactly what we're going to figure out today as we dive into measuring and analyzing transaction finality. Look, we've all been there, right? You hit send on a transaction, you stare at your screen, and you feel that classic Web3 anxiety creeping in. Is it done? Is it safe? Did I literally just launch my tokens into the void? Because honestly, dealing with blockchain reworks can kind of feel like the network is just randomly deciding to rewrite history. One second your transaction is right there, and the next, poof, it's gone, swallowed up by a competing fork. Today, we're going to cure that anxiety using some cold, hard math. So here's our game plan for today. We'll start by unpacking that finality anxiety, then break down the big three metrics you need to know. After that, we'll look at some real-world business scenarios, figure out how to compute this stuff with code, and finally, bring it all together into a simulation table. All right, let's jump right into part one, the big three metrics, where we actually start quantifying all this uncertainty. Our very first metric is confirmation depth. Mechanically speaking, this is just the integer count of blocks built directly on top of the block that hold your transaction. So, if the chain is currently at block 100 and your transaction is sitting in block 95, your depth is exactly 5. I want you to think of confirmation depth like you're wrapping your transaction in layers of bubble wrap. Every new block is another protective layer, and every single layer requires a competing fork to do exponentially more work to pop that bubble and revert your transaction. Simply put, the more layers you have, the safer the package is. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Depth alone does not instantaneously guarantee safety. I mean, 5 layers of bubble wrap won't save a package if you drop it out of an airplane, right? And that brings us to our second metric, empirical reorg probability. This is the measured historical chance that a transaction at a specific depth actually gets reverted. We have to look at the empirical probability over sliding historical window to gauge our true risk. We aren't just guessing here. We're literally asking the blockchain, hey, over the last 30 days, how many times did a transaction that was 5 blocks deep get overwritten? Now, the crucial thing to remember is that humans don't naturally think in blocks or probabilities, do we? We think in minutes and seconds, and that gives us time to finality. This is the average time required for a transaction to reach your chosen probability of persistence. If block times start varying wildly or the network is lagging, your time to finality stretches right out. This is absolutely the metric you lean on when you're modeling user patience. When your app tells a user, please wait 3 minutes, you're using time to finality to manage their expectations and meet your service level agreements. But listen, we can't just set these metrics and walk away. We have to constantly monitor for early warning danger signals on the network. Things like block propagation latency, which is how long it takes a block to reach 95% of the network, or peer head divergence, where different nodes can't even agree on what the top of the chain is. And especially keep an eye on the uncle or orphaned block rate. A sudden spike in the uncle rate means blocks are colliding and getting discarded, and that directly and immediately alters those finality probabilities we were just talking about. Moving on to part 2, let's explore some real-world scenarios and what we call the Goldilocks effect. Let's compare 2 totally different mindsets here. On one side, we have the lightweight wallet. Think of the impatient user who just bought a coffee and needs to see a quick ETA on their phone. This wallet needs incredibly fast time to finality and has to adapt quickly to network latency so the user doesn't freak out. On the flip side, we have the exchange deposit. An exchange is hyper-cautious because it's dealing with millions of dollars. It demands absolute mathematical certainty. We're talking high confirmation depths and near zero reorg probability before it ever credits a user's account. To put a really fine point on it, just look at this number, 0.0001. That is a 1 in 10,000 chance. A major exchange might dictate that it will wait for 12 full confirmations just to ensure it hits this tiny 0.0001 empirical reorg probability over a rolling 30-day window. They are minimizing their operational risk to the absolute floor. They honestly don't care if a user has to wait a few extra minutes. What they care about is not losing $1 million to a double spend attack. And it's wild how dramatically the math shifts with just a tiny tweak to your parameters. Let's say you're an exchange handling 10,000 deposits a day. If you only require 3 confirmations based on historical data, you might be looking at around 200 expected reversals every single day. That is an absolute operational nightmare. Your support team would quit on the spot. But if you just wait a tiny bit longer, pushing it to 6 confirmations, suddenly you drop to about 10 expected reversals a day. You've literally turned a daily crisis into a perfectly manageable anomaly. Let's dive into part 3, computing metrics, where we extract these signals using code. Think of this like a blueprint. First, you're going to connect your node RPC using a library like web3.py. Second, you scan a historical window of blocks, let's say the last 5,000 blocks. Third, and this is where the magic happens, you look at the block heights and count the unique block hashes. If block height 1000 has 2 totally different hashes recorded in your window, boom, you just found evidence of a reorg. By counting those multi-hash heights, you reveal the network's real empirical reorg incidence. And finally, step 4, you calculate the average time between blocks to estimate your time to finality. Now, when you write these scripts, you're going to face a massive engineering trade-off when choosing your historical sampling window. The rule of thumb goes like this. A long window reduces variance, it smooths out all the bumps, but you might completely miss a sudden network attack that's happening right now. A short window, on the other hand, captures exactly what the network is doing today, but it can be incredibly noisy and trigger false alarms left and right. Choosing the right window, that is the true art of Web3 engineering. Which brings us to part 4, the simulation table, your ultimate blueprint for the capstone project. Seriously, this table is your ultimate payoff. Memorize it, dream about it. It maps out your exact metrics, the method to calculate them, and the units they output. You've got your integer blocks for depth, your 0 to 1 probability for reorgs, your seconds and minutes for time to finality, and your propagation latency in milliseconds. In your capstone, you are going to plug this exact table into your simulator to dictate exactly how your mock application behaves in the wild. But remember, your table shouldn't just sit there being static. You need to map those metrics to specific network scenarios. I highly advise setting up what I like to call scenario knobs in your simulation. Have a normal setting where latency's fine and uncle rates are low. Have a congested setting where everything is lagging and blocks are actively colliding, and absolutely have an adverse setting for when the network is under a known attack. You're going to dial in your application's risk tolerance dynamically based on which of these environments the network is currently experiencing. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. But I want to leave you with one final provocative question as you head into your capstone project. What are your application's absolute limits? Like, how much network chaos can your code really handle before it just completely breaks? I want you to test those limits, for sure. Push your simulations right to the brink. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. Make sure to visit forge.college to master even more Web3 engineering topics. Check out the rest of the Ethereum fundamentals track and keep building. See you next time.